The following is a conversation between myself and Edward Lorn, who has his own YouTube channel. It's a BookTube channel. It's one of the channels that I originally started watching when I got into this whole thing. And I strongly recommend that you head on over there and check it out. The link for that will be in the description. Edward is a big Stephen King fan, so I think that would be an appropriate place to start. I want to thank you for coming on my program here, and if you can tell us how you got into Stephen King, I think we'd be off here.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me. It all started when I was very, very young. The very first piece of Stephen King content I was ever shown, I was at a drive-in when I was 9 years old, and my mother and her friend Andrita were watching Pet Cemetery, and my dad didn't want to watch me, so they stuck me in the back seat. I hid behind the driver's seat for the entire movie. The only time that I ever poked my head out was right when Zelda comes out of the bed. And I literally peed myself. I was so scared. Well,
Wow.
that's my first experience. But fast forward to when I was 13, Mom had signed up for the Stephen King library, and she was getting books in the mail. And it was about this time that she had moved all of her horror. Yes, she had moved all of her horror content into what I ended up calling the Great Book Closet. And it was anything with, gnarly covers, that kind of thing. And all of Stephen King's books went in there. She was a huge super fan. From the original publication of The Stand, the cut version, she had started buying Stephen King's books brand new. So it was a constant presence in the house, even when she moved the books into the closet so I couldn't get to them. The closet had a lock on it. Of course, you try to keep a child away from something, that child is going to gravitate toward that thing.
Yeah.
So what happened was she got Dolores Claiborne in the mail, and I saw the Stephen King book club on the return address. So I stole it out of the mail. I opened it up. I started reading it. I think I read it in 2 sittings. And then my goofy butt, I ended up resealing the package, putting it back in there, resealing the package. And that's what started the whole thing for me. I blew through Dolores Claiborne, and I've been a fan ever since. So my first Stephen King book was that one. It was when I was 13 years old. I then stole Needful Things out of there. I think I finally got caught 2 or 3 books later. I can't remember which order I'd read them, but every single thing I could get my hand on, I would get. And then I started taking literally my lunch money from school and going to Lucky's. I grew up in Southern California. Lucky's grocery store. I would go down there and I would buy them off the rack there, the paperbacks. And finally, she realized, almost kind of like a drug enabler kind of deal. She finally realized that I was going to do this anyway, so she might as well open up the book closet to me. But that's how I started, man. And Dolores Claiborne read so fast. I think I got through it faster than I got through any of the other stuff I was reading at the time, like maybe Goosebumps or Scary Stories Tell in the Dark, that kind of stuff. Christopher Pike, I was a huge Christopher Pike fan. But nobody captured the horror like Stephen King did, especially not in like middle grade books. It's a completely different world. It was an adult world, and I was all about it. So that's my history.
That it's something that might be kind of weird about me is that I'm on my quest to read all the Stephen King books, and I haven't read Pet Cemetery yet, and I haven't seen the movie. The interesting fact is that I'm not really big on movies because I think my attention span doesn't cooperate with movies. And maybe that sounds backward. I'm saying that I have the attention span to read an entire novel, but I can't watch a 90-minute movie. But that's interesting that you had a really intense experience with your first Stephen King experience, and you became hooked on it. And it was when you were talking about taking the books out of the closet there, before you mentioned that she was like a drug enabler, I thought that in my mind, it was almost like it was a drug, because reading is an extremely enjoyable thing to do. And I think that my first Stephen King book, and it might have been the first adult novel that I ever read, was actually Desperation by Stephen King.
Oh,
And I was like just fascinated by the world of novels. The only other novel that it might have been that I read as my first novel was A Time to Kill by John Grisham, but that's been so long ago now that I can't recall. But I really loved.
that's a heavy read. How old were you when you read Grisham?
I'm thinking I was probably like 14 or 15 years old. And boy, I was caught up in that novel. That was such a dramatic, pulse racing novel that, in my mind, it basically is the standard by which a legal thriller should be set. But I was really into that novel. And you mentioned that you liked Goosebumps. I actually went to a Goodwill where I was going through a bin the other day. And I used to really like these Matthew Christopher novels. They were like baseball books, and he had some different sporting books, but I'm like the only one in the world that's ever heard of these things. But you're
I,
probably familiar. Yeah. Go ahead with that thought.
I've seen those. Oh, the Bernstein Bears, man. In fact, the book you just held up, I know the cover of because I was a huge Scholastic Book Fair nerd. Oh yeah, Horton
Yeah.
Hatch's
Okay. Yeah.
Horton Hears a Who is one of my son's favorites.
Yeah. I'm actually going to read that. I
Oh yeah.
picked that up basically to put in my background because I think it is neat. And I remember when I was a kid that I actually have a distant memory from grade school where a teacher, I think it was Mrs. Golden Sims, was reading us a Berenstain Bear novel. And I never know how to say it. Is it Berenstain or what it is? But I remember we were like in a circle and she was reading. And I remember those books from my childhood. But you mentioned Goosebumps, which was huge for me. That was before I read the Desperation novel, and I really loved those things. I loved the matching covers and how engrossing those novels were. And you know what? I used to read the Babysitters Club as well. I don't know where I got those books at. They were in the house when I was a kid, and I really liked those. Let's talk about another author here before I forget because it's important. Yeah, yeah.
Let me cut in for just a second.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the Babysitters Club. I read those two because I have two older sisters, and one is 12 years older than me, one's 14 years older than me.
Yeah.
I came along late, obviously. But those were a staple in the house as well. And going back to Goosebumps, I think it was Goosebumps that started, other than my mom's Stephen King collection and the great book closet that had John Saul, Peter Straub, just all the great authors of that time. I started my own Goosebumps collection, and the reason why I wanted to start that is because I wanted those matching covers. I wanted those matching spines. And I think now that you mention it, you're spurring a memory. I think that's the very first time that I realized that. Well, the very first time that I started collecting, and I've been a collector ever since.
So it was those matching covers on those Goosebump books that got you. And they got me as well because there were like the normal neon colored ones, and then there would be like a special edition of some Seek Your Own Adventure or something that would come out, and it would have like gold flakes on it that was a similar kind of color pattern, but it was different. I remember I had a big block of those things by my bed when I was a kid, and I used to read them. I really loved them. I remember Say Cheese and Die, that dummy, The Night of the Living Dummy was a big one because there were like many installments of that, but that was absolutely genius. Did you ever read anything else by R.L. Stine? Because I have not. I'm just curious because I know there was a popular one called The Beast and the Fear Street novels, and I know he even writes adult fiction, and a lot of people are really into him. Was it limited to Goosebumps for you, or how did that go?
When I was of that age that you read Goosebumps, normally, it was all Goosebumps. But then as I hit my teens, in between my Stephen King read, because I've read exclusively Stephen King for the longest time, probably 3 or 4 years. But once I started hitting my later teens, probably 15, 16, I started reading the Fear Street novels. And my favorite, it's odd, it might sound strange, but my favorite of the Fear Street novels are the cheerleader series. I don't know what it was about those books. They were gruesome. I remember someone being beheaded on a bus, and I was just blown away. I was like, why was I stuck on Goosebumps for so long? This other stuff is great. Now, when I tried reading both Superstition, the one with the black cat on the cover, that's his first adult novel, and his second one was Red Rain. I didn't like either one of them.
Really?
But I still can go back. I can still go back and read Goosebumps. I can still go back and read Fear Street. In fact, I'm trying to recollect the Fear Street books. A little bit of backstory, what's happened to my collection of like Goosebumps and stuff like that. Hurricane Opal came through in '95, and we were living in Mobile, Alabama, and we had just moved there. My brother-in-law put all of our stuff on a flatbed trailer, and when it came through, we had to run to Mississippi to get away from it. And it just took everything and threw it everywhere. So I lost everything. Even my mom's original Stephen King collection got destroyed. And I'm talking first edition Carrie, first edition The Stand. You know, I'm talking about books that are worth, thousands right now because she had them in pristine condition. But yeah, so going back to R.L. Stine, just to wrap that up, I don't know what it is about his adult fiction that bothers me, but there's something like when I read him, it's like I want to feel like a kid again. So when he doesn't do that for me, it's almost like a slight. It's almost like, man, you're letting me down because the whole reason I'm reading you is because that nostalgia. But yeah, so that's my take on R.L. Stine's adult stuff.
What that made me think of is that sometimes an actor like Macaulay Culkin, for example, does such a great job with one movie that he's basically doomed to do any other movies within the rest of his lifetime. And R.L. Stine might be similar in that way, where he had such a hit with those Goosebump books that every time you pick anything up by him, you want that Goosebump book experience. And if it's not that, then it's not that. But before we drift off into Dean Koontz and some other things here, when it comes to Stephen King, my favorite tale by Stephen King is the Dark Tower series. Interestingly, I've only reread 3 books in my entire life that I've did more than one read on. I read The Gunslinger, book 1 in the Dark Tower series 3 times, The Drawing of the Three, the second book, 3 times, and I also read Dean Koontz's Fear Nothing twice. I'm assuming you've read the Dark Tower series. Can you give us your thoughts on... Well, let me first tell you that I absolutely love that series. It's the greatest thing I've ever read. It's the only epic fantasy series that I've actually completed, and I'm on my quest to complete some more. Make sure you subscribe here to stay in on my journey for the audience. But I love this tale because the scope is huge. The characters are many. The backstory is just huge and filled in by other Stephen King novels that are not in the series. And this is a really unique series because of that. There are literally like 40 other books that connect, some in just a minor way, just a very mention of The Gunslinger or something like that, or something like Insomnia that is all about the Dark Tower. I'm assuming you've read this. If you can just give us your thoughts on the Dark Tower series and the connections that play into it.
Okay. Well, first off, the first 3 books in that series, in my point of view, are absolutely perfect. The Gunslinger, a lot of people get hung up on the Gunslinger because it's an extended prologue. I mean, it's a 300-page prologue is all it is. It sets up, what the journey is going to be. Yet the Battle of Tull is probably the best battle or fight scene in the entire series, I feel. Then you get to the Drawing of the Three, and the Drawing of the Three starts to introduce the characters. This is very, very strange in the world of epic fantasy to have an entire book from just the main character, and then to introduce the other main characters in the second book, and then not even really truly get on the journey of the whole story until book 3. And because of that, The Wastelands is one of my favorite Stephen King books of all time. It's in my top 5. The Wastelands, I feel, is a perfect, if it's just a perfect book. I feel it's not my favorite from him, but it is, I feel, a perfect book. Now, I'm one of the outliers here. When I get to Wizard and Glass, I kind of roll my eyes. That
Me too.
the middle of that book, the whole chunk, the whole chunk of the flashback regarding Susan and Rita the Coos and all that stuff, and the Coffin Hunters, it's some great concepts, but it killed the character of Roland for me for a while, because what I loved about Roland was he was this mysterious figure, and Dean and Susanna, Eddie and Susanna, they were the humanity side of Roland. So once I got that backstory for Roland, I was actually really upset. And I still to this day can't stand the book. I've read the entire series 3 times. I've read the first 3 books numerous times.
Yeah.
But then we get back to years later, we finally get back, and he shot out all 3 books within 6 months of each other. Wolves of the Kala, Song of Susanna, and then the end, The Dark Tower. I liked Wolves, hated Song of Susanna, and I liked The Dark Tower. But as an entire whole, even including The Wind Through the Keyhole, which is I would say it's my 3rd or 4th favorite Dark Tower story. I know that seems weird, but I love that book with all of my heart. But I would give the entire series, all 8 books, I would give the entire series 5 stars because of the circular nature of the narrative. I think the ending of The Dark Tower, not warned, but he foreshadowed in the original one. I came to the Dark Tower series late, though. I had read all of these books that tie in. I had read them, I would say, all the way up until Insomnia, before I think, I might be getting my time frame wrong here, but I think I had read all the way up to Insomnia before I even started the Dark Tower. So I caught all the references. Some of this, I was lost in some places with Insomnia, but once I got done the first time reading the Dark Tower, I started all the way back over again. I've read through his books chronologically twice. One was in, I think, 2001 in preparation. I think it was 2001 in preparation for the ending of the Dark Tower. I think they came out in 2002, 2003, something like that. And then I reread it again. I reread his entire catalog again in one single year. I did this thing, Decades of King, where I read every single one of his books within that year's time. And every time I got done with a decade, I would put up a blog post. This is well before my YouTube channel. This was in 2015.
Yeah.
But doing that and having read everything from him in chronological order. So I didn't read them back, going through my notes for not the Dark Tower, but through my read through all my blog posts and everything that I did. And I realized that I could connect even the ones that haven't been, even the ones that King hasn't said or verified that connect to the Dark Tower.
Yeah. I
could connect them. Every single last one of them, from Carrie all the way to If It Bleeds. Well, not at that time, of course. If It Bleeds just came out. But so I started taking more notes. I started reading the ones that I thought maybe were very, very light on the theory. And I found much better theories. So I started the Thursday Theorist series, or the Stephen King theories. The whole purpose of that series was to do several different authors, but I've been stuck on King because he releases a book every single year. So I don't think that series will ever really finish. I've wanted to do Clive Barker, Haruki Murakami, even what's her name? JCO, Joyce Carol Oates. Is that right?
Yeah.
Anyways, I thought about all these authors that have such a huge back catalog that I could plan. Is because I was like, all right, there's people out there who love the connections, as you were saying yourself, that you love the connections with the Dark Tower with other Stephen King books. And it just became stupidly popular. Those
Yeah.
still to this day, those videos are my most popular videos, other than right now my Stephen King ranked series, which should wrap up next week. It Anything Stephen King just brings in people, even people who don't like Stephen King, which is to the detriment of my comment section sometimes. But I also don't have the same opinion. I think that's why people come to the channel for that dissenting
Yeah.
opinion, because I'm not a huge fan of The Green Mile. I hate Wizard and Glass. I think it's one of the worst books he's ever written. And that's saying something. I get a lot of flack for that. But I think people come because I will tell you my honest opinion, and I will listen to yours.
Yeah. And what Edward's talking about here is that he does a segment on his YouTube channel called The Stephen King Theorist, where he reviews books and talks about the multiverse and everything like that. So you're going to want to check that out. When it comes to that Dark Tower series, I agree with you on book 4, Wizard and Glass. I wasn't the biggest fan of it. And the reason for that is that as I was pursuing the tower, I was really interested in what that Dark Tower was, because even the gunslinger himself doesn't know what the Dark Tower is, doesn't even know why he's obsessed with it, but he does know that he'll do anything to get there. But I just wanted to get closer to the tower, and Wizard and Glass is a huge backstory. And in the paperback form, it must be close to 1,000 pages. And it was like going in the wrong direction. Rather than pursuing the tower and getting more information about actually getting there, we had to go back. And then the very next installment, 4.5, The Wind Through the Keyhole, is yet another book that's not actually pursuing the tower there. So I actually did a video recently about the books that connect into the tower. And I recommended leaving The Wind for afterward, because first you've got to go through a massive backstory in Wizard and Glass, and you're going to want to move on toward the tower, or at least I did. But I didn't like that book for basically that reason. It felt like it lost momentum, the series did, with that installment, especially because of how lengthy it is. But anyway, I wanted to mention this too. I actually read the first Dark Tower comic, The Gunslinger Born, which is going into Wizard and Glass and talking more about the kids and the gunslingers when they were young, and some different scenes that happen in Wizard and Glass. And that's pretty interesting, and it was definitely doable because it was far more brief than Wizard and Glass itself. But
Right. Yeah, I've read the Marvel series. I actually far prefer the Marvel series to Wizard and Glass for that reason. I love the way that it starts there. Whereas we don't have to now. Of course, King had no idea that he was going to be or he says that he had no idea that he was going to be flashing back for a 600-page tirade on the history of Roland and his first love. Right. And another thing, with you mentioned The Wind Through the Keyhole being book 4.5. I agree with you. I don't think you should read that one or The Little Sisters of Illyria. I don't think you should read either one of those until after you've read the entire series. But if you ever read it a second time, I definitely recommend going in order. Read Little Sisters of Illyria first before The Gunslinger, and then jump into the series as a whole. But that way, when you get to book 4.5, it's not another stopping point. It's not another pause. You know what you're getting into. You're not going to get to the tower right away. One thing I want to add while we're still talking about the tower is I love the sleight of hand that Stephen King did with us not knowing whether or not Roland was going to I don't even know where this is going to end. Just like Roland didn't know how it was going to end, or Roland didn't know what the tower even was or why he was drawn to it. Yeah. And he kept telling you in every single forward, I don't know if Roland will be the one to find the tower. And of course it ends the way it ends. And I'm just like, oh, you son of a, anyways, but that's one of my favorite parts, is that he put that warning there. and it kept me interested. You were talking about you wanted to know what the Dark Tower was. I wanted to know who was going to make it to the tower. So the Dark Tower, book 7, was a huge shock to me. And most people, most people expect what happened, but with me, I was like, wow, okay, so we actually, okay, all right, this is cool. I'm right here for it.
Yeah. When it comes to the Dark Tower novel, which is probably maybe the second longest novel I've ever read, it's 1,050 pages in the paperback. Without getting into spoilers with this thing, I did not like the way that the series ended. I was just almost baffled by it. I was nearly disgusted by it. Okay. But then after reflection, after some, and King even puts a warning in the novel right before the final chapter of the Dark Tower series. He puts a chapter in there that says, you might not want to go any further. You might not like how this thing ends. Just put it down now and leave it to your own imagination. And I thought that was interesting. But upon further reflection, especially going back and reading The Gunslinger a second, third time, The Drawing of the Three a second, third time, I'm seeing the eggs that were dropped concerning the ending of the story, and there were like a bunch, and I didn't catch any the first time through. And it was quite clear that King had planned in advance, ending it in some way. I don't know if he knew exactly what the ending was from the beginning, but there are like clues all throughout the book concerning how that series is going to end. So just give me your spoiler-free insight on what you thought of that final novel.
In fact, I'm the exact opposite of you. I felt that the ending of the 7th book was the best part of the entire series. I'm a big fan of theme. I'm a big fan of circular narrative. I'm a big fan of anything that comes full circle. And the way he ended it, I felt was absolutely perfect. And I liked certain aspects. I liked Mordred. He's hated throughout the community, unfortunately. Yeah. I liked Mordred. I liked the entire, well, this is more for books 5 and 6, but I liked the entire Callahan subplot.
Oh,
I liked that whole thing. I like seeing Father.
Excuse me. That was brilliant.
Father Callahan again. That was, yeah. I didn't think we'd ever see that character again. It's funny, you never know when a Stephen King character is going to pop up. Like Cynthia was in both Desperation, and she was in Rose Matter, and she was in Regulators. She's in all 3 of those books, and you never know where these characters are going to fit in.
Yeah.
So when I got to the end of that book, I was getting kind of bored with the final battle kind of deal.
Yeah.
I was getting bored with it. I was like, oh man, what is he going to do? Because I had heard nothing but people complaining about how the Dark Tower series ended. So I went in with very low expectations, and he blew me away. Now, with those eggs you were talking about, I honestly think that Stephen King either had written or had jotted out notes or whatever a long, long time ago when he initially rewrote The Gunslinger. I'm pretty sure he wrote something down. He said, I know exactly how I'm going to end this. And it was, I really like those reissues of the Gunslinger. I really like those covers.
Just for the audience here, the Gunslinger, which plays into what you're talking about here. Here's the revised edition, the one I'm shaking. And here's the original edition. This was the original release of the Gunslinger. The difference between them is about 35 pages of manuscript, and King corrected some errors. He merged 2 characters into one. There were some problems there. But go ahead on with your analysis of the ending of the book. It is true. And I want to just make one more point here, that when it come to me disliking the ending, after I started going back through them and seeing those eggs, I guess I became more appreciative of the ending. And I thought it was a more sophisticated vision that King had than just some random horrible ending that he couldn't figure out what was going on. It became something, I guess I became a little bit more of a fan of the ending after starting to go back through the books. And perhaps by the time I finish them a second time, I'll be even more of a fan. But I do agree that King had to have had some insight about how that last book was going to end, because it's all throughout the series. So go ahead there.
The yeah, that's been my theory the entire time, that he had to have, because there's notes of those eggs that you were talking about in the original manuscript for the Gunslinger. There's a lot of stuff, yes, that he fixed to make sure that the series was cohesive, that it made
Yeah.
sense, that there wasn't any plot holes, that kind of thing. I do find it funny that he revised it, and so you have a little bit of a different experience in some sections. And the way I look at it is just another turn of the wheel. There are some people who go, he cheated, but I mean, you have this epic work that is 4,000, no, more than that. I think it's over 4,000 pages long, complete. You have this epic body of work that it not only is it a rumination on story, because by the time you get to Wolves of Kala, I mean, he's bringing in Harry Potter, he's bringing in Marvel comics, he's bringing in all different kinds of stuff for the ending of Wolves of Kala. So and all of the stuff. I mean, he brings in Wizard of Oz into Wizarding Glass. That entire series is kind of just an ode to story. So him going back and pulling from his own books is, of course, a major plus for me. But I feel that there are certain missteps along the way with the road to the tower, of course, Wizarding Glass, and a couple other things. But the idea that this man worked on this series for decades, and I believe he said that he blew through the last 3 books. He's like, he survived his car accident. Well, the van hit him. He wasn't in the car, but he survived his accident. He's like, I have to finish this. One of my favorite stories from him about the Dark Tower is the terminal old woman who wrote him a letter and said, please, I'm going to die. I need to know what happens. And he literally had to tell her, ma'am, I don't know myself. I can't tell you. And I'm so sorry. That as a storyteller myself, that's gotta be, that's a tragedy, that this woman, never saw the tower. But you can also see the way he changed, because he wrote the Gunslinger when he was 19, and then he revised it, and then he revised it again later on after the first publication. But to think that this whole thing started in the mind of a 19-year-old, and we have been able to sit there and watch Stephen King mature this entire time, and every single book reads a little bit differently than the last one. If he were to compile them all into one book, it would read like several different authors had different takes going on with each one of these stories. But yeah, man, and as far as you not liking originally, I know you came to appreciate it, but as far as you initially not liking it, that took some serious guts on Stephen King's part, because the series is honestly the best. Over fourth, I'm sure it's more than that. I'm probably closer to 7,000 pages. But to do that with a series that long, and not expect, but make it to where the best way to read it is to have read them all for the first time, and you're going in your second time. That takes a lot of guts, man. And that's one of the things that I love about Stephen King, is still to this day, even with If It Bleeds, he is trying new stuff. The man wrote a detective fiction in his 70s. There's no other author that I know of that is still challenging themselves, that is still, he might do the same themes. Every book might have a psychic or a small town or whatever you want to joke about, but he is still trying new stuff, and he's trying to keep up to date. Even in his autumn or winter years, he's trying to keep up to date with current events, and he's adding those in the books, and he's altering his themes. Some of his early books, they're problematic as far as racism, homophobia, that kind of thing. There's a line in The Stand that says the black savages broke into the radio station. There's some really problematic stuff in there. So to see him completely change his point of view in the world, it's a journey. You literally almost, not literally, but you're almost growing up with this man as you're reading through it. That's just another thing that I wanted to add in there. That's why I love Stephen King, because he's constantly trying something new.
For the audience who are not constant readers, many people assume that Stephen King is a horror writer, and that's what he's wrote is a big collection of horror novels, but that's actually not right. Probably only about 50 or 60% of his novels are horror novels. As a matter of fact, I read his romance novel, Lisey's Story, earlier this year, and there are some elements of horror in it, but people don't realize Stephen King wrote an epic fantasy series. Stephen King wrote a detective trilogy in his 70s, the Mr. Mercedes trilogy. He has other detective stories. He has elements of sci-fi and Western and mystery and thriller. And it's just really unbelievable. A lot of times people will tell me, I don't read Stephen King. Books are too scary for me. And that's fair enough. That's fair enough. But a lot of people don't realize that you can read a mystery novel by him if you want to. He has done so much that it's absolutely incredible. And perhaps in the future, if you don't mind, I could have you back on where maybe we can go through the Dark Tower series for an hour or something and do a spoiler-filled assessment of the series. But let's move on here from Stephen King to some more horror stuff. Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz, oftentimes his name is kind of linked to Stephen King's in some ways. When you think who are the two most popular horror writers, you just might think Stephen King and Dean Koontz. I'm not as big a fan of Dean Koontz, but I have enjoyed some of his works. For example, of the novels I did rereads on in my lifetime, one of the three that I've reread was a Dean Koontz, Fear Nothing. I love his Christopher Snow trilogy that he has going. We don't have the final installment yet. And I've liked some other of his books. I liked Seize the Night, the second book in the Christopher Snow trilogy. And I'm just curious about if you've read a lot of Koontz and what you think about his works.
I have read everything by Dean Koontz, some of them twice, all the way up until Ashley Bell. In fact, I have a video up on the channel that suggests, it theorizes that Stephen King was influenced to write many different sections of after reading Dean Koontz's Phantoms. There are a lot of parallels together. Watch the video. I found a lot of stuff. I don't want to go into anything because it's spoilers, of course. It's completely loaded with spoilers. Yeah. But I think at one point in time, I mean, even Family Guy did Stephen King versus Dean Koontz, where they're fighting and one of them runs the other over with a car. It's a hilarious little segment. But those two authors couldn't be more different. Dean Koontz has always written a sci-fi heavy thriller. I don't think he's ever truly written a horror novel in my eyes. Even Phantoms goes more to the sci-fi element, and things like he did do some stuff like under the Lee Nichols name, which could be more horror. The Mask was Owen West, but he had so many pen names. And when he did try something new, he usually wrote it underneath a pen name, so nobody knew that he wrote this other stuff. As far as the Christopher Snow books, I love the Christopher Snow books. In fact, I've been upset for the longest time that he keeps pumping out these books about super intelligent golden retrievers, and he hasn't gone back and finished in fact, I think it has a title, man. The third book has a title. We know where we're going. I think it's something about a storm, a coming storm, something like that. But Fear Nothing, Seize the Night. I love both of those. But oddly enough, I think that the reason why he never finished the series is because he got sidetracked with Odd Thomas. And when you put those two characters together, take away the Psychic Thomas's psychic abilities, you put those two characters together and they are awfully similar, man. Sure. It's the same thing. They got the small towns, whether it be Picamundo with Odd Thomas or Moonlight Bay with Christopher Snow. I wish, and now he signed a whole new deal with Amazon, so he's pumping out stuff for them. I honestly don't think we're going to see this final book, and if we do, I'm terrified that it's going to be new Dean Koontz, and I cannot stand new Dean Koontz. After Velocity. You held that one up. After Velocity, something changed with him, and he started going heavy into Intensity. Sorry, not
Yeah.
Velocity. Those, he's got so many books that, you know, the titles are very similar, because he got Relentless, Breathless, Intensity, Velocity, that kind of thing. And I did like Intensity, but it started a downhill trend with him, and then everything that he wrote had this super intelligent Labrador in it, or super intelligent dog that could communicate with humans. And then Trixie, his favorite, the love of his life, I would imagine, his dog Trixie dies, and I don't want to say that the man lost his mind, but he lost something. There's no his writing went from, he used to write some really good heartfelt stuff too, and the heartfelt stuff now comes off as maudlin. It comes off as, you know, purple prose. It comes off as him trying too hard to be literary, where I think someone like Stephen King, that just comes natural. With Stephen King, you read his books and it's like you're reading someone telling you a story, and he'll talk to you. Stephen King will talk to you in his books. He's like, readers or baseball fans, he'll call you all different kinds of different things. And of course, he wrote himself into the Dark Tower. I love that about him. Whereas Dean Koontz, there's this divide with Dean Koontz that I don't feel, it's almost like he thinks he's smarter than you, which is funny because I don't find his books as clever as some people do. But I am a huge fan of the 80s and 90s Koontz, especially his Berkeley paperbacks. I went nuts over those books. In fact, I'm a huge fan of some of the stuff that he released under pen names, like let's see here, The Voice of the Night. I had one of the things that was destroyed in it. What'd you say? Sorry.
No, I just want to let the audience know, and I'll blur my address there when I do the editing, but Dean Koontz will actually write you a letter. If you send him a letter to his P.O. box, he periodically goes through those and he sits down, and I can tell by the response that I got that he actually read it. So that's just kind of an interesting thing, that Dean Koontz is one guy that will reply to you if you send him a letter. But go ahead and make your point there on what you were talking there when I did that.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to throw this in also. When I was a teen, I wrote to Dean Koontz also, and I got a typed letter back from him that was signed. Unfortunately, that was one of the things that was lost when Hurricane Opal came through. But Keelan Patrick Burke, I'm not sure if you're aware of his fiction, but he's a fantastic horror writer, leans more to the literary side. His stuff has got subtext, it's depth, all the stuff that I love with horror when it's done well. And Keelan Patrick Burke, he's another one. He actually still has the letter that Dean Koontz wrote him. Is Dean Koontz a good guy? Yeah, he's a great guy. But I think that's what upsets me about new Dean Koontz, is he's kind of gotten rid of all the stuff that I fell in love with. Stuff like exactly. Stuff like Lightning, stuff like Phantoms, stuff like Watchers. I tried to reread Strangers recently. I couldn't even finish it.
Yeah.
So maybe there's some nostalgia glasses on when I think of some of his books, but I recently reread Phantoms because I started thinking about that book. I started thinking about Phantoms, and I was like, some of this stuff in it seems awfully familiar. So I decided to do that, and I ended up getting into it, and it was like every 30 pages I found something that was in it also, which completely blew my mind, because there's a blurb on the book, on the paperback copy that I have of Phantoms, from Stephen King. So he read the book, and both books were published not around the same time. It was very, very close together, but Stephen King said he wrote 80 and 85. Either 80, it's a 5-year span of time. And during that time, he had to have read Phantoms. But there's a lot of stuff. It is a very cool journey if you go from reading Phantoms to reading it. you see a lot of similarities. Now, it's nowhere near the same book. It is almost 4 times the size of Phantoms.
Yeah.
And Phantoms, in my opinion, is the lesser book. But what King did in there, there's obvious either odes or some subconscious use of some of the stuff that Dean Koontz used. I mean, even in Phantoms, they call the entity in Phantoms it. So there's a lot of stuff in. Yes, exactly. There's a lot of stuff. I don't want to get into spoilers, but that's about the most minor one that I can say without getting into spoilers. But as far as Dean Koontz, he was amazing at one point in time. Do I think that he should ever be compared to King or King compared to him? No, absolutely not. You're dealing with a thriller writer that very rarely goes outside of his genre. And then you're dealing with someone who I believe is the greatest storyteller of our greatest living storyteller. Because, like you said, he's written literal romance. Where in Misery, when he's writing as Paul Sheldon writing Misery's Return for Annie Wilkes, he writes literal romance. He writes a romance, a snippet of a romance novel, and he nails it. It reads just like any other romance novel. He's done everything. He's done sci-fi, like you said, sci-fi, fantasy, horror. He's done all of that stuff. And I really hate that he is known as a horror writer. I really dislike that. But what I hate even more than that, are people who said that once he stopped writing horror, he started writing bad books. And that's just absolutely not the case. Because some of his best work, in my opinion, wasn't until after his car accident, once he got the trilogy of trash out of the way. What I call the trilogy of trash is Dreamcatcher, Cell, and From a Buick 8. I can't stand those books. That's some of my most hated. The only books I hate more than that are Wizarding Glass and Elevation. Those are books that I couldn't stand also. But after that, he came out with Lacey's Story, Duma Key. He just started pumping out these amazing works of literature. Yes, they were not horror novels, but they were terrific. And to limit him to this box, it upsets me. I'm not going to lie. But with Dean Koontz, and I'm bringing this all back around with Dean Koontz, he's never done that. Everything that he writes is either thriller or sci-fi heavy thriller. Anytime he throws in a horror element, he has to explain it. He has to give you the scientific reality of this monster creature or whatever, and I don't like that. Stephen King will just throw in he'll throw in a monster that's a set of chattering teeth. He'll have he'll have a monster that's one of those monkeys that slap the symbols together. He'll have the craziest thing, and he'll be like, "Deal with it. You're not getting any explanation. Deal with it." Whereas Dean Koontz would go down to the most minute detail. Obviously the little mechanical monkey that hits the symbols together is an android from this alien race of people that, he's got to have something in there to explain away the horror. And I don't think that's horror. That's why I call him, a thriller, sci-fi thriller writer kind of deal. Anyways, that's my tirade.
You made some good points there. When it comes to Dean Koontz here, one of the things that I think it's true for me is that Dean Koontz seems to come up with these fabulous, intelligent, unique plot lines when the book first starts. Like, I'm sometimes just blown away about how thrilling a Dean Koontz novel can start. It's something that I've never read before. It's very calculated and considered and just engrossing and interesting. And about halfway through the novel, I'm wondering if it's going to go dramatically, quickly downhill. And then the ending is like nonsensical and doesn't fit. And I've experienced that more than once. Ashley Bell started out really good for me. And I thought, okay, here's something coming. And it just went a place that I didn't like. One Door Away from Heaven. This is a nearly massive paperback that I thought started very, very well. I was totally into this thing. I was hooked on it. And it was another one where halfway through, and then the ending was so absurd, I just couldn't believe that the ending was related to the beginning in this book. And like, there have been quite a few. I probably read 10 of his books. But like, I get the occasional gem from Dean Koontz, like Fear Nothing or Seize the Night, or The one, life expectancy was one that I absolutely loved by Dean Koontz. I think I read it in the period of one day. I was so into that. But like the majority of the Koontz books that I've read have been, I read The Eyes of Darkness this year, and I know you didn't like it because I watched your review on it.
Mm.
I basically forced myself through that book. It was just so amateurish is what I was thinking the whole time. But Breathless was another one that was like that. Started good, didn't end very well. Like there was a lot of unresolved issues in Breathless the way I saw it, but I just don't know when it comes to Dean Koontz. Like one thing about Koontz, here's one of my main points about Koontz, is that he's such an intelligent man that he writes these sentences and philosophical paragraphs into his novels where like he'll just completely step away from the narrative and throw a paragraph about life in or pain or suffering or love that is so well written and striking that I almost like want to circle it in the novel so that I can come back and read it again, because he has so much insight about the human condition and life and death and experience. That is one reason that I like reading him, because he'll cause me to think about things as I'm going through. I've literally been nearly in awe of some of the passages in his books, but overall, the majority of his books have just failed for me.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with you completely, 100%, about those passages, and that's one of the things that I can't stand about Koontz nowadays, because he will still have those passages, but the rest of the book will be absolutely garbage. I want to go back and talk about two books that you mentioned that you enjoyed. One of them is Life Expectancy. Unfortunately, I have read, like I said, I have read a lot of Dean. I've read everything from Dean Koontz up to Ashley Bell, and I'll talk about Ashley Bell here in a second. I didn't like Life Expectancy at all. In fact, I gave it 1 star, and I'm completely fine with other people's opinions. In fact, I appreciate it when people disagree with me, because if we all like the same things, life would be boring. With Life Expectancy, this is one of the main problems with Dean Koontz that you're going to find if you continue on your journey with him. He has rewritten the same 10 novels 50 to 60 times. If you go, I have reviews up on Goodreads of I think Night Chills. I think Night Chills is the first one that I reviewed like this. I have a Dean Koontz checklist of 10 things that are in almost every single Dean Koontz novel. Now with Life Expectancy was almost a literal reboot of the novel Lightning. There are whole scenes, whole sections of dialogue, whole sections of Life Expectancy are in Lightning, and Lightning, in my opinion, is the better book. It's a completely different plot. One's dealing with time travel, the other one's dealing with, well, I don't want to talk too much about Life Expectancy, but for him to have completely rewritten the Lightning in a different way was the first time that I noticed that he was reusing stuff. Now going to Ashley Bell, I quit Ashley Bell 2 pages in. 2 pages. And the reason for that was, I see your reaction. The reason I did is because as soon as I got to a mention of a dog, as soon as I read, I think it's on page 2, there's a mention of a dog. I think it's either German Shepherd or whatever. I was so, and I'm not saying, I'm not making fun of this word whatsoever, but I was triggered. I literally slammed the book closed and I threw it in a closet. I was done with it. I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I contacted whoever's publisher is. I think it's Ballantine or something like that. I contacted them. I said, I don't want any more advanced review copies. Take me off the list for Koontz. I'm done with this man. He has to put a dog in everything. And some people look at me and go, well, you love Stephen King. There's a small town and everything. There's a psychic and everything. Yeah, but it's not the same kind of psychic. It's not the same kind of small town. And with him, it's always the same kind of dog, because the only reference he has is his dog Trixie. So, but I think that's funny. I got a lot of crap for I even reviewed it. I gave it 1 star, said I quit it after 2 pages. Now you can say that's wrong if you want to, that's fine. But I did that. I was like, I can't stand this anymore. I can't do, and I haven't read a new Dean Koontz book since then. And if you look at all of the descriptions for all of his new stuff from the Amazon exclusives, every single one of the descriptions has this dog this highly intelligent dog with a soul as golden as his breed. Every single one of these things has a dog in it, man. Just move on. I'm tired of reading about super intelligent dogs. It was fun for a little while, but here we are, and he's fallen off the horse, in my opinion. But I thought it was funny when you brought up life expectancy, because like my eyes got kind of big. I was like, wow, someone actually likes that book. But if you haven't read a whole lot of Dean Koontz, I can see you enjoying it, because you haven't read all the other times that he's written the same book. There are a lot of stuff, like the scene on the mountain pass when they're on the mountain road and they end up out in the woods in life expectancy. That scene is taken directly from Lightning. And it's one of those things, he just keeps reusing things, which is funny because Stephen King's written as many books as Dean Koontz has, much longer, much longer tones. And he rarely reuses the same theme. He might reuse the same concept, like small town or a psychic, but he doesn't do what Dean Koontz does, which is throw in the same blonde woman and the same super intelligent dog and the same super precocious child. That seems to be Dean Koontz's stick, and he's made a lot of money off of it, so why not, right? Anyways, so, but that's pretty much my thing with Dean Koontz, is how much he repeats himself. It gets on my nerves, and that's why I quit Ashley Bell on the second page.
Yeah, I've read I read 2 Dean Koontz books this year. I read Seize the Night, which I really enjoyed. And I read The Eyes of Darkness, which I didn't like, but I forced myself to finish it. I also tried to read Watchers, and I gave up on Watchers because there's a super intelligent dog in it. And it is true that in got to be more than half of Dean Koontz's novel, there's a dog involved in the main part of the plot. But with Watchers, I was really underwhelmed. And it's me coming back to saying that a book started good, and I was really looking for this vicious, bad entity. That's what it sounded like in the beginning. And then when the reveal started to take place, I was like, I'm out. I read half of it and stopped. I was actually leading a group read through that book, and I quit because I was just basically disgusted. But I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to read that Phantoms before I read it, because I've got to read it later this year so that I can see the connections that you're talking about. I think that's going to be really interesting. We're running along here on time, and I want to I
got one.
Yeah,
sorry.
Sure.
I just want to say one thing about Watchers. Watchers was the first, unless I missed something, Watchers was the first instance of the super intelligent dog, and it's also the first, well, not the first instance, but it's also a perfect example of what I was talking about earlier, where Koontz has to over-explain everything, and that's one of the problems. He had to explain the monster in Watchers some way, so of course you have dun 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 government conspiracy, and that's one of his staples. So anyways, but yeah, go ahead, continue on with what you were saying. Sorry to cut you off.
That's actually a staple in the Moonlight Bay novels, as well as the government conspiracy issue. So yeah, I think I agree. You've read all of his books, or most of them, and I've read maybe 9 or 10. Twilight Eyes was another one. I remember I made 292 pages into Twilight Eyes, which is a carnival horror novel taking place in the carnival there, and I just could not finish it. I just did not care how that book ended. I read this year Black House.
Let me cut you off one more time. You keep on bringing up good points, really good points, because Twilight Eyes is literally my second favorite Dean Koontz book, but the book is two different books. So when you say that you couldn't finish it, or that you didn't like the second half of the book, that's because it was two different books. He went back years later and wrote a new ending and tacked it on to the end of it, and it's another 200-300 pages long after the original one. So if you just read that first part with Skip and at the carnival and all that stuff, if you only read that part, you have the original book in perfection. That's where I stop nowadays, because when I first read it, that's what I read. And it wasn't until years later, when he released the extended cut, that I was like, why did he add any of this? Why did he put it in the same book? It doesn't make any sense. The stuff is awful. But that first part Yeah, where they're at the carnival is a fantastic book. It's when
Yeah.
he added that other part, things went downhill.
There was, I agree that Twilight Eye started well. And there was a character in there. There was this carnival worker. He was this kind of hard, grizzled older guy that buried one of the monsters earlier on. I can't remember his name, but I would have liked a whole book just about that guy's life. I thought that he was a really
I
interesting
agree.
character. But yeah, like I just couldn't finish it. That's an interesting fact that it was two different books that were merged there, and I can see that now that you mentioned it. Let's finish this on a horrific note here. Earlier this year, well, let me tell you this, that I don't have a whole lot of experience with horror novels outside of Stephen King, outside of Dean Koontz. I read like maybe a few at most. And earlier this year, sorry about that, I read Black House by Stephen King and Peter Straub, and I read The Talisman by Stephen King and Peter Straub. And I'm thinking, well, I want to broaden my horrific horizons here. And maybe I could read a standalone or a book by Peter Straub that's not co-authored to kind of step out of the Stephen King multiverse, to get away from the Dean Koontz and experience something more with the horror genre. So I thought about maybe reading Ghost Story by Peter Straub, because I hear like infinite good recommendations on that book. But I'm curious about what you would recommend to a person like me as far as the good books you've read, and what you think I might like to enjoy, or the audience might like to enjoy, if they're not like really super knowledgeable about the horror genre.
Yeah, definitely. With Ghost Story is one of my top 5 horror novels of all time. I think it's a fantastic book, and I would definitely try to read it. I wouldn't start there though. I wouldn't go even from King to there or Koontz to there. I would start with someone like Bentley Little or Jack Ketchum. I would start with even Brian Keene or Edward Lee if you're into really graphic stuff. But there's a horror author that I mentioned earlier who's right now, I think he's the best in the business, and that's Keelan Patrick Burke. His novel Kin is imagining it imagines that the Texas Chainsaw Massacre didn't end where it ended, but it's not Texas Chainsaw Massacre branded. It's the same type of story. Basically, he was trying to write the after novel of a slasher movie. And that's absolutely fantastic. His novella Sour Candy, The Tent, let's see here. Oh, what's the one? Blankie. Where it's literally a killer blanket. He has the imagination of King stripped down to maybe 100 to 300 pages. He's absolutely fantastic. Anybody who likes horror, definitely pick that up. As far as other ones, I would say Mariana Enriquez, if you are a short story fan, her collection Things We Lost in the Fire is the second best collection of short stories I have ever read. Clive Barker's short stories, I've never been able to finish one of his novels, but his short stories, I think he is the greatest living short story author. Man, I have so many recommendations. Oh yeah, Weave World. Like I said, I haven't been able to finish any of the novels, but his short stories are amazing. I would also look at Jack Jems's The Grip of It. It might be a little too cerebral for some horror fans, but also I would put up there Scott Smith's The Ruins. The man's only written 2 books. He did A Simple Plan, which is a noir thriller, and he did The Ruins. Completely ignore the movie. The movie's terrible. The book is fantastic. I'm trying to think. I'm not a huge Peter Straub fan, but Ghost Story is amazing. I'm trying to think of anyone else. Oh, Robert McCammon. Robert McCammon's work is absolutely fantastic. Boy's Life, Gone South, They Thirst. Just so many great novels that he has written. And he's like Stephen King also, where he'll write, a more literary side, and it's not all about the horror. But then you have so many different I could just go on and on and on, but I think those are good starting points, especially like a Bentley Little is a perfect introduction to adult horror. You're going to get everything that you would normally find in adult horror. You're going to get the extreme violence, extreme gore, You're going to get very weird sex. You're going to get all the stuff that you would normally read. He's another one who's like Stephen King light. So I would say probably the best introductory horror would be to go out and get some of Bentley Little's stuff. And they're very, very quick reads. They're all the same size, about 350 to 400 pages. Very easy to get through. And he's a great writer. But if you want something super short that's almost like a horror movie that you can read in 2 hours, Keelan Patrick Burke is the way to go.
That sounds pretty good. I'm looking forward to getting into some good, vivid horror because I'm limited on reading Stephen King because, of course, I got hooked on him and I wasn't really concerned with reading anyone else for quite a long time. So I'm doing basically two projects here. I'm trying to read more epic fantasy. I want to get into actually completing another epic fantasy series. And I want to get into good horror novels, because there's a huge market for good horror novels. And I know that there are a lot of good ones that I'm missing out on. So I'm going to take those recommendations there. And for my audience, what was the one you recommended? Was it Kin?
Kin. Yeah, it's Kin.
Yeah, I'm going to give that one a shot. And I'm going to read and review it here on my channel. So keep your eye out for upcoming reviews. I thank you for coming on here, man. We've had a good discussion here. I really would have loved to got into that Dark Tower series and talked a whole bunch of spoiler talk, and perhaps we can do that in the future. You've got a few different things going on, and I'm going to drop the links in the description so that the audience can check that stuff out. I highly encourage you to go over to Edward Lorn's channel and check out some of his horror reviews. He does really in-depth breakdowns on Stephen King, spoiler-free and spoiler. There's just a whole lot of stuff going on over there on his channel. So make sure you check that out. And I am going to go ahead and cut this off. Thanks for coming over, man.
And thanks for having me. It was a blast. And yes, we definitely need to do that Dark Tower spoiler talk. Definitely. 100%.
Indeed. See you later, guys.